Totally. I'm curious. It brings us nicely into like, where is AI seriously being implemented or augmenting the sales workflow in the Fortune 2000?
Yeah, well, and so I'll just give a little bit of context on sort of what we do on a day-to-day, just so people know
That's
what I'm talking about. So our work is mostly focused on primary market research with the kind of highest level buyers and sellers of AI. So what I mean by that is, of the vendor companies, we're generally talking to companies that have raised over 100 mil, oftentimes companies that are unicorn firms. And then on the buy side, we're often talking to kind of the Russell 2000, Fortune 2000 size companies. So what are the big guys doing for adapting? And then what are the really mature vendors doing for traction within those big organizations? So we work with a lot of the vendors to reach an enterprise audience. We build enterprise audiences all day. But in order to do that, we have to touch both sides. And that means for me personally, 1,000 interviews in the last 8 years. So it's a lot of conversations, and that's not even counting surveys and the email stuff that we do for content creation and everything else. So it's a lot of direct touches. And so when we've seen sales start to bubble up, it's been through the vantage point of what's actually getting bought, not what's the fanciest demo on YouTube, but what are sales teams using? So I'll use that for our background. Based on that, I can give you a couple categories that I see as relatively established, and a couple categories that I see as relatively burgeoning. And when I say burgeoning, some of these are riding directly on the tail of large language models and some of the developments we've seen with ChatGPT and things like that. So the two much more established ones would be for data, the collection and enrichment of data. So we have companies like the ZoomInfos of the world and whatnot. And when those guys were founded, they were, using the phone book and, researching on Google and having to manually update every record. Nowadays, a lot of what gets scraped is being scraped, sometimes not by AI, but sometimes by artificial intelligence in some way, shape, or form. It's being collected, parsed in that way, but it's also being cleaned and updated in that way. And so there's a lot of tools for keeping your CRM up to snuff. Does somebody quit their job? Do you have contacts that need to be merged? Do you have people whose last names are being confused, et cetera, and having this stuff done? Because we all know salespeople are not going to take 4 hours out of a Wednesday and get that done. Nor do we probably want them spending their time doing that anyway. So, so we have data acquisition and sort of data enrichment / cleaning. This might be the oldest school AI use case in the sales space. The other that is relatively mature is sort of prompting and next steps. And this comes in a lot of forms. So we've done some interviews with the choruses of the world, for example. I oddly enough got bought by Zoom, and other players that are sort of in that world. So examples of this prompting, there's technology that helps us to get a scoop on the company. What are the latest press releases, product announcements, whatever related that might affect my deal? How do I lead with that in my sales call, lead with that in my next email, lead with that in my LinkedIn nudge, et cetera? That's, AI powered in some way. There is real-time feedback within actual calls. This is a little bit more on the cutting edge, but being able to identify, is this an objection? And am I not overcoming this objection? Or is this a specific emotion on this person's face that might be indicative of a bit of a steering and a change that I might want to do to my own conversation? There's companies like Unifor, for example, that are starting to do some interesting stuff with facial rec and making recommendations to salespeople in real time. So there's sort of the real-time steering stuff. And then there's the prompting of next actions maybe after we have a sales call, where we can say, what's the status of this deal? Based on progress with other deals, we think it has this chance of closing, or we think this deal is at risk based on all these different behavioral factors that are happening with it. Or here might be the best time to send a next email, et cetera. So prompting and next actions broadly, and data collection and enrichment broadly would be sort of boots on the ground examples of things where big enterprises are actually using it.
Interesting. I like I think it was the Unifor example. I think I saw on their site, and I believe Gong is doing this as well, where they're filling out MedPick for me. You're filling out the qualification. They're listening to the call. They're extracting the things around. This is the metric. That's wild.
And this is relatively new, but it's important stuff. Yeah. So the facial rec and even some of what you just mentioned there, relatively new, but important stuff for sure. And all of this is somewhat new. So just for your knowledge and for the listeners' knowledge, the initial uptake on these tools has always, in sales specifically, has always been strongest in sort of B2B tech. So when this new like brand spanking, oh, here's what your sales team can do that's the most cutting edge, razzmatazz, Unifor's facial stuff, for example. My guess is, Northwestern Mutual is probably not customer number one for that. So the way that these technologies start to bubble out is they go to people selling generally software to other businesses. Those are the sales teams that are really well funded, that tend to be on the cutting edge. They're already growing. They're already digitally native, and they're used to switching up and using the latest tools. And that's almost the proving ground. So if you see 7 really strong B2B tech companies, or 6 or whatever, that are talking about how much they like XYZ new tool, that's a really strong signal that it's going to be almost impossible for that stuff to not bubble itself in over some time into the enterprise. Not everything is going to pass that test, by the way. But we do see that as kind of the rounds that specifically on the sales side, these technologies have to go through.
Totally. I think I've been maybe more guilty than others, maybe minimizing the impact of tools like Gong and Chorus on the meeting recording side. From my perspective, like I started my career in entrepreneurship in 2012. And to your point about where ML was at the time, it was useful in some cases, better when you could really put it on rails. It was not amazing with text. And so when I look at, the capability and the capacity of, say, a meeting transcriptions offering using AI 5 years ago was garbage.
Yeah.
The nuance, the context. It's better now. You use tools like Whisper, or, on the back end, if you're using OpenAI or GPT-4, like I'm sure GPT-4 is much, much better than even, 3.5 was 6 months ago. But it's crap in, crap out, and I think we're finally reaching a point where you're able to automate some of the workflow, some of the actual sales tasks that salespeople would be doing or were doing manually, now that the transcription has reached a certain inflection point.
Absolutely. I mean, transcription, taking into context emotion and inflection and things along those lines, to be able to look at where did the objection come up? Did we handle it? When did we start talking about price? And was that later than we ought to have in our normal half-hour call? Or was that just about where normally we're going to hit our sweet spot? And these are all things that we can only visualize in an analytics sense, because AI can listen in on the call and drop that stuff. So being able to, that kind of next best action prompt is part of a bigger picture of just being able to put analytics on something that was otherwise dark, which to your point was kind of the text and voice stuff. Very, very dark world until we had AI that was capable of dialing it.
Totally. And it's kind of the combination of the two. It's the text and the information that you're getting out of the calls, and it's the wrong word to describe it, but the sort of the graph, the lattice work of your previous sales history as an organization, right? It's all of that activity history in all your old Salesforce ops, your leads, your all of that. And when you combine the two of them, that's when it can get really deadly at scale.
Yeah. And I think we've yet to see what deadly at scale looks like, to be honest. I think deadly at scale is going to evolve probably in really well-funded B2B tech companies. And there's going to be tools and competitors that start offering things downstream to the point where you're going to be able to have 3 salespeople literally moving the weight of 12 salespeople in terms of the research being done, the email copy being done, the follow-up notifications being done, the LinkedIn pings being done. Maybe not everything being automated, but so much of it being put in simplified dashboards and simple ways of follow through. We haven't begun to fight in terms of what this Frankenstein looks like when we actually cobble it all together. And there's even more applications in the near term that we're seeing sort of become inevitable next waves too. We talked about the 2 that are very much in the enterprise now. I got a handful of those as well whenever you're ready for them.